We are a software company here in Wilmington. We are helping labs ditch the paper logs. That's our little tagline here. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So jumping right in, if you do own a lab or you work in one and you're buying a bunch of expensive lab equipment, then you probably know a very common thing that you do, especially in the clinical side where we were birthed out of, is you're going to buy, your Siemens, your chemistry lines. All your equipment is usually rolled off the truck with a paper log, believe it or not, to track your maintenance and QC. We know that all the patient data is electronic. That's a thing of the past, and anybody who's not doing that electronic is in the dark ages. But this maintenance and QC is surprisingly still done on paper across the board. And so what you can kind of relate that to is if you have a car, you have to do your tire rotations, your oil changes and all that. That's what this maintenance is about. So you have to do things like run QC, you have to clean it, you have to change sensors, all this kind of stuff. How do they track it? Again, it's on paper logs. These are real images from very large hospital systems across the NC system. And the biggest issue with this is it really is a costly issue. You have a lot of time wasted on the front end because obviously it's a paper system. Some of these little check marks are fine, but when you talk about things like QC where they're writing NEG for negative or 2.5 and all this stuff, it really adds up on the front end for users. And by the way, everybody hates paper, right? But there's downtime that'll happen if something fails. You literally won't know about it unless you're there looking at it or you make your rounds and find out about it later. But these audits are the real headaches. You have to be audited based on your credentials and that sort of thing, as well as if there's a lawsuit, they're going to say, hey, prove that you really did what you were supposed to. So guess what they do? They go to these folders and they literally drag them out and they flip through them with a piece of paper to prove that they actually did this stuff. So it's kind of amazing. And if there's a mislog or a fake log, there's a lot of money that is on the table for that. So what we've done is we've provided an electronic system for that. I'm not going to walk you through a demo and teach you how to use the software, but I will highlight a couple points. Lablogs.co is the name of the software platform that we have. Whether it's a dry bath, a chemistry line, a kit test, you name it, you can actually use our system to track everything from temperatures that they do, their maintenance, their QC, and we actually tell them what needs to be done instead of them going through a clipboard to see what needs to be done, okay? And then imagine if you do this across the system, especially if you're a multi-site system, like a large Novant system or a large whatever, you name it, that's where you get the real win, okay? So you can see everything under the sun in one big view, and you know when things fail. So for example, this Aptio, it's kind of hard to read, but there's a service report. There's 4 service reports that were done. We're going to tell people about that. Right now, they don't know it, right? Or they will eventually, but they don't know it off the hand. We can actually send them immediate notifications. And then, as I mentioned, the big thing is this is all done because of audits, okay? So when they're audited, right now an auditor comes in a room, they pull those binders off the shelves, like I said. Not anymore. In our system, they literally, with a click of a mouse, they pull the reports. And honestly, they already know where they stand, okay? So it's not a big like, oh my God, I hope they don't see where we missed this, or I hope I don't see if we missed something. They already know where they stand. So they pull up a report in seconds. They can export it to PDF, or they can use our system to do that, okay? So that's what we're doing. We're actually already in market, and we're pretty proud of the system. So where are we? We started in the hospital world. It actually was birthed out of local system here in North Carolina, and it was birthed out of a hospital lab. And then we started getting pushed into some private labs. Thought we might find our niche there, but really we didn't. It's kind of everybody in the world needs it. Even the physician's offices, which we do have some of those, but they're kind of a different breed. We can get into that in another time. But those are the current segments we're in now. So not just your clinical labs, even your FDA labs, which you'll see in a second, is quite a huge impact to our TAM. And then in the future, we do plan on getting to a couple of this. If you would have looked at our slide deck this time even last year, these would have been flopped. We would have thought we'd go into radiology and some of the other stuff. That is way down the road. We don't have time for that. Instead, there's a lot of use in this anonymized data. Again, we can get into the details of that later because I'm on a time crunch, but just suffice it to say that there's a lot of data here useful to a lot of people, okay? So let's talk about the TAM. CLIA was where we started. Those CLIA labs, it's a term that just means you're a clinical lab. You have to have a license in the US in order to run a clinical lab. That is the biggest chunk of our TAM initially. And that's where we were like, oh, this is plenty, right? It's like a 1 point whatever billion dollar TAM. We're like, that's way big. And then we started looking at FDA labs, and we got our 21 Part 11 compliance, and we're like, whoa, this is a different world. And so obviously it really puts us in a different market, okay? So a lot of money on the table for this, and honestly, it's money that all of these labs need. That's what's crazy about it. We have people literally calling us and thanking us when they go through an audit, so it's pretty impressive. So who's out there, who's been doing this, who tried, who didn't make it? Some of the biggest players on the market have taken a stab at this. Epic is a small company. I say that jokingly. But they obviously are one of the big gorillas. They have a product called Beaker, which does some of this that we do. They do track some of their maintenance. They do QC very well. But it's like everything Epic does. It's pretty, bolt-on functionality. They don't care to play with other people. And everybody who uses Epic still uses us. There's a reason for that, right? So we'll leave it at that. There were a couple players. Capios is very close to us. They've kind of fallen off. I think their funding kind of died out. But they were close. They just required installs. There were a lot of things that weren't thought out very well. And then Media Lab is our biggest competitor. Interestingly enough, they were just acquired, and that acquirer, the people who acquired them, are now talking with us. So there's some interesting conversations we're having. But they're the closest one to a competitor for us, although they started in the educational space. Okay, so they do some of what we do, not all of it. But they're a pretty good company, and then there's some others that just didn't work. All of the Siemens and the HPs of the world, by the way, the reason they didn't do well is they only tried to do it for their stuff. So they nobody wants to use 30 different pieces of software in the lab. So where have we been as a company? In 2019, we had our beta in New York. That's where one of our founding partners, the guy who told me about this whole crazy scenario, he's in New York, and we started there. We said, all right, put your neck out online and see if your lab likes it. And we did that, and it worked well. End of Q4, we said, all right, let's hire a sales guy and go to market. And we had our first sale with New Hanover Regional here locally, now Novant, excuse me. And thank God we did, because there was a small little thing that happened called COVID. I think you guys are all familiar. And everybody actually from the outside looking in thought we were crushing it because we were a lab company. And COVID was like, oh, labs are killing it, right? We're like, no, not for us, because if you're not COVID related, they're not buying a thing, right? So everybody was like, dude, we love it. We're not allowed to buy it. Sorry, we'll talk to you next year. And they did. So we started in 2021 really having those constraints were lifted. There was still a little bit of craziness in the COVID world, but all those people started coming back on. We signed up 18 labs. 2022 has been like crazy bananas. I don't know the right adjectives, adverbs, whatever to use, but it's been crazy. We have 50 labs plus now signing on. We also have agreements with the big two, as you would call them. I've been not using names intentionally here, but you can use your imagination. And they are coming on at the beginning of next year. And we also have a whole bunch of others that are big healthcare systems, and we actually have Uzziah back here, one of our sales guys who's responsible for that. So go Uzziah and team. If Mark's somewhere out here, I think too. But it's been amazing, suffice it to say. 2023 is going to be, I'm going to need a lot more help with sleep and everything else, and team and money and everything else. But there's approval for a whole bunch of these top 10 healthcare providers are coming on. And most of them start out as hey, let's start out in our small, 50 labs and then increase. It's kind of crazy the way it happens, but you'll see that's why your expansions really kind of hockey puck us up, or hockey stick us up. So what's the team here that got this thing started? These are the partners. Said myself, I was actually a software guy, I knew nothing about the lab, still only know enough to be dangerous. Thank God for Jeremy and some of the others that we have on our team. Jeremy's the one who came to me with this problem. He's still in the lab, still loves the lab, bless his heart, because it's a tough industry to be in, especially in the clinical side, but he is still in New York running things up there. Chad Hart's, though, is our CTO. He's full-time now, so we were able to pull him on this year as a full-time CTO and continue to help us lead the development team. He's amazing. And then we also have Randy Long, who's really more of a business advisor in a lawyer role. Randy and I, by the way, helped fund this thing from day one financially. So you'll see that related on the cap table if you get that far. And then we also have a pretty amazing team already, but it needs to quadruple in size coming up. So that's why we need money. So We are actually doing right now a quick bridge round to get us to either a Series A or an exit. I know that's quite leading, but we are doing an 800K round right now. 200 of that's already been committed, so there's 600K open, or not committed, I mean landed actually, I should say. 600's open, and then we are also, like I said, talking about what's next. So that's to get us through the next 6 months, well, now 5 months, to where we can talk with Series A. So we'll talk about both of those with whoever's interested. And the main use of funds is, like I said, we need to scale our team like today. So both the customer success team and the development team, and then there's some financials. That's not fake numbers. It does not include the big two, by the way. So it looks big, but that's because it is big, and there's a lot of potential also with the big two that would actually make that look silly. So, so that's it. Again, Daniel Summers, there's my info here. Happy to field any questions.